Hello everybody, and welcome to the third annual AI Now Symposium. Somehow we've got to 3 already. We are so excited to have you here tonight. It's been an extremely big year. This is our biggest gathering. This is where we talk about what's been happening in AI. We acknowledge good work and we map some paths forward. And we have a stellar lineup for you tonight, and they're going to be addressing 3 core themes: ethics, accountability, and organizing. Our first panel is going to be on facial recognition and surveillance. The second panel is going to look at the problems of rising inequality, austerity politics, and AI. And then finally, we're going to look at the intersection of research and organizing, and how these can work together to develop stronger accountability and address some of the vexing issues that we've been facing in 2018. So speaking of that, we're going to give you a tour of what happened this year. Now, AI systems have been increasing in power and reach against a pretty stark political backdrop. Meanwhile, there have been major shifts and upheavals in both the AI research field, but also in the tech industry at large. To capture this, we have decided to do something a little different. We're going to visualize for you all of the stories that happened this year. Now, I want to warn you, this is a little overwhelming, and it's designed to be because, well, it's been a pretty endless parade of events this year to keep us busy. But here goes. In any normal year, Cambridge Analytica would have been the biggest story. But in this year, it's just one of many. In fact, Facebook alone had a royal flush of scandals, including, let's go through them briefly, just a sample. A huge data breach in September, multiple class actions for discrimination, accusations of inciting ethnic cleansing in Myanmar in September, potential violations of the Fair Housing Act in May, and for hosting masses of fake Russian accounts pretty much all year round. And we saw Facebook executives frequently summoned to testify, with Mark Zuckerberg himself facing the US Senate in April and then the European Parliament in May. But Facebook was by no means the only one. News broke in March that Google had been building AI systems for the Department of Defense's drone surveillance program, known as Project Maven. This kicked off an unprecedented wave of tech worker organizing and dissent. And then in June, when the Trump administration introduced the family separation policy that forcibly removed parents from their children, employees from Amazon, Salesforce, and Microsoft all asked their companies to end contracts with ICE. Not even a month later, it was revealed that ICE had tampered with its own risk assessment algorithm so that it could only produce one result. 100% of immigrants in custody would be receiving the recommendation of detain. 0% would get release. Meanwhile, this was a very big year for the spread of facial recognition. We saw Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft all launch facial recognition as a service, offering plug-and-play models off the shelf. We also learned that IBM was working with the NYPD and that they had secretly built an ethnicity detection feature so that you could search for people's faces based on race. And they did that using police camera footage of thousands of people in New York, none of whom knew that they would be used for this purpose. And all year, we saw more and more AI systems being used in high-stakes domains, with some real consequences. Back in March, we had the first fatalities for both drivers and pedestrians from autonomous vehicles. And then back in May, we had a voice recognition system in the UK, which was meant to be detecting immigration fraud, accidentally cancel thousands of people's visas. And then in July, it was reported that IBM Watson was producing inaccurate and sometimes dangerous cancer treatment recommendations. Now, all of these events have been pushing a growing wave of tech criticism, which is focused on the unaccountable nature of these systems. Some companies, including Microsoft and Amazon, have actually made public calls to have regulation of technologies like facial recognition, and that's a first. Although, so far, we haven't really seen any real movement from Washington. Waiting on that one. So that's a tiny sample of what has been a hell of a year. So researchers like us who work on issues around the social implications of AI have basically been talking about the scale of this challenge that we now face. There is so much work to be done. But there are also some really positive changes too. We've seen the public discussion about AI mature in some significant ways.
So 6 years ago, when I was reading papers from people like Kate and Cynthia Dork on the topic of bias in AI, these were outlier positions. Even 3 years ago, when Kate and I ran our first AI Now Symposium, some of you may have been there, this was not a mainstream topic. But now it's pretty standard, right? There are news stories everywhere about the ways in which AI can reflect bias, and they provide us with just so many examples. Like Amazon's machine learning system for resume scanning, which was shown to be discriminating against women, to the extent that it was actually downranking CVs simply for containing the word woman. Then back in July, the ACLU showed how Amazon's new facial recognition service incorrectly identified 28 members of Congress as criminals. A significant paper also showed that facial recognition software performs generally less well on darker-skinned women. And we are thrilled that the co-author of that paper, AI research scientist Timnit Gebru, will be joining us on stage tonight, along with Nicole Ozer, who drove the ACLU project. So overall, this is a big step forward. People now recognize bias as a problem. But the conversation has a long way to go, and it's already bifurcating into different camps. In column A, we see a rush to technical fixes for bias and a kind of solutionism. In column B, we see an attempt for ethical codes that will do the heavy lifting for us. In just the last 6 months, speaking of column A, IBM, Facebook, Microsoft, and others have all released bias-busting toolkits. These promise to mitigate issues of bias in AI systems using statistical methods to achieve mathematical definitions of fairness. Now, attention to bias issues from the technical community is necessary and it's important, but they can't fix this problem alone. Because at this point, they're selling technical methods as a cure for social problems. They are sending in more AI to fix AI. You may recall that we saw this logic in action when Facebook, quizzed in front of the Senate, repeatedly pointed to AI as the cure for its algorithmic ills. Now, the second response, column B, has been a more public turn to ethics and ethical codes for the tech sector. In part, this is just a reaction to this big year. What should be built? What should we not build? And ultimately, who should be making these decisions? Google published its AI principles, Microsoft and Salesforce turned to ethics boards, and a crop of ethics courses emerged with the goal of teaching engineers to make ethical decisions. But a study published just yesterday called into question the effectiveness of these approaches. It showed that software engineers do not commonly change behavior based on exposure to ethics codes. And perhaps this shouldn't surprise us. The current focus on individual choice, thought experiments, and technical definitions is too narrow. Instead, more oversight and public input is required. Or, as Lucy Suchman, a pioneering thinker in human-computer interactions, put it, while ethics codes are a good start, they lack any real public accountability. We're also delighted that Lucy is joining us on our final panel tonight. So in short, while ethics principles and bias-busting tech can help, we have a long way to go before they can grapple with the complexity of issues now in play. The biggest, as yet unanswered question is how do we create sustainable forms of accountability? This is a major focus of our work. AI Now was formed as an institute at NYU just under a year ago to address these kinds of challenges, and we have already begun looking at AI in large-scale contexts beyond a purely technical focus to include a wider range of voices and methods. So, Kate, how do we do this?
Well, Meredith, let me share with you. We basically have been seeing 5 themes emerging from our work around accountability. So we thought we'd just give you a quick tour of these tonight. So first of all, there's a lot to be learned by looking at the underlying material realities of our AI systems. Last month, we published this project, which is called The Anatomy of AI. This is a result of a year-long collaboration between myself and the excellent Vladan Jola, where we investigated how many resources is actually required for you to build a device that responds when you say, Alexa, turn on the lights. So starting with that, with the Echo as our example, we basically traced through all of the environmental extraction processes from mining and smelting and logistics and container shipping through to the data resources you need to build AI systems at scale, to the international networks of data centers, all the way through to the final resting place of so many of our consumer AI gadgets, which is buried in e-waste tips in Ghana, Pakistan, or China. And when we look at these material realities, I think we can begin to see the true resource implications that these kinds of large-scale AI really require for our everyday conveniences. But in doing this research, we also discovered something else, that there are black boxes on top of black boxes on top of yet more black boxes. It's not just at the algorithmic level. We're also looking at issues with trade secret law and untraceable supply chains. So I think this is why the planetary resources that are needed to build AI at scale is really hard for the public to see. But it's actually really important if we're going to develop real accountability. Second, we are continuing to examine the hidden labor behind AI systems. Now, lots of scholars are working on this issue right now, including people like Lily Irani, Ma Hicks, and we are delighted that tonight we have Astra Taylor with us, who coined the term photomation for those systems that claim to be seamless AI, but can only function with huge amounts of click worker input. Because often when we tend to think about the people behind AI, we might just imagine a handful of highly paid engineered dudes in Silicon Valley who are like writing algorithms and optimizing feature weights. But this isn't the whole picture. As Adrian Chen recently showed in a documentary, there are more people who work in the mines of content moderation than the people who work at all of Facebook and Google. So AI actually takes a lot of work, and as we're going to hear tonight, most of that goes unseen. And third, we need new legal approaches to contend with increased automated decision-making. That means looking at what's working and looking at what's needed, because accountability rarely works without liability on the back end. Now, there have been some breakthroughs this year. We saw GDPR, which is Europe's General Data Protection Guidelines, come into effect in May. And New York City announced its Automated Decision Task Force, the first of its kind in the country. And then California just passed the strongest privacy law in the US. Plus, there are a host of new cases taking algorithms to court. We just recently held a workshop called Litigating Algorithms, where we invited public interest lawyers who are representing the people who've been, say, unfairly cut off from Medicaid benefits, or who lost their jobs due to biased teacher systems, and people whose prison sentences have been affected by skewed risk assessment software. This was kind of an extraordinary and positive gathering because it really focused on how do you build more due process and safety nets. And later tonight, you're going to hear from Kevin de Laban, whose groundbreaking work is important in this space. We also published algorithmic impact assessment frameworks, which is designed to give the public sector more tools to critically inquire as to whether an algorithmic system is even appropriate to be used, and then ensuring more community oversight. Rashida Richardson, who is AI Now's very own Director of Policy Research, will be talking more about this later tonight.
So this brings us to broader systems of power and politics, and to the topic of inequality. Because popular discussion of AI often focuses on hypothetical use cases and promises of future benefit. But of course, AI is not a common resource available equally to all. Looking at who builds these systems, who makes the decisions on how they're used, and who's left out of these deliberations can help us see beyond the marketing. These are some of the questions that Virginia Eubanks explores in her book, Automating Inequality, and we're really happy that she'll be joining us tonight. There's also growing concern that the power and insights that can be gleaned from AI systems are further skewing the distribution of resources, that these systems are so unevenly distributed that they may actually be driving greater forms of wealth inequality. A new report from the UN published last week said that while AI could be used to address major issues, there's no guarantee it will align with the most pressing needs of humanity. The report also notes that AI systems are increasingly used to manipulate human emotion and spread misinformation, and that they run the risk of reinforcing existing biases and exclusion. Well, tonight we have the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Philip Alston, who'll be joining us to talk about his groundbreaking work on inequality in the US. So it's clear that if this last year was a big moment for recognizing bias and the limitations of technical systems in social domains, this coming year is a big moment for accountability. And the good news is a lot is already happening. People are starting to take action. There are already new coalitions growing. We're really excited to be working with a wide range of people, many of whom are in this room right now, including legal scholars, ethnographers, journalists, health and education workers, organizers, and civil society leaders. Now, AI research will always include the technical, but we're working to expand its boundaries. We're emphasizing interdisciplinarity, and we're foregrounding community participation and the perspectives of those on the ground. That's why we're delighted to have speakers like Sherilyn Ifill, the president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Vincent Sutherland, the executive director on the Center for Race, Inequality, and the Law at NYU, each of whom have made important contributions to this debate. Because genuine accountability will require these new coalitions. Organizers and civil society leaders working with researchers to assess AI systems and to protect the communities who are most at risk.
So tonight, we offer you a very different type of AI symposium. We're really consciously including a wide range of disciplines and people from really different sectors to try and support those new coalitions and build more accountability. That's a big reason why Meredith and I founded AI Now in the first place, and it really drives the work that we do. Because AI isn't just tech. AI is power, it's politics, and it's culture. So on that note, I'd like to welcome our first panel of the evening, which will be on facial recognition. It's chaired by Nicole Ozer. She's based at the ACLU of Northern California. And don't forget, you can also submit your questions for any of our panelists. Just go to the Twitters and use hashtag AINow2018. And that's true of people in the room tonight, but also everybody on the live stream. Hello guys, we see you. Not really. So please send your questions in and we'll be sure to have a look at them. And now, on with the show.